You have a caller. To accept the call, press 1. Hey.
Hey, the webinar is saying I need to register, but then they say I'm a host and I can't register, so I'm not able to go. Main thing.
That's interesting. Let me see. I think I can send you. Oh, let me see if I can invite you. Hang on.
God.
Yeah, I'm trying to. Come on, damn it. All right, see if this gets you in. I see that there's people in the waiting room. I don't want to wait. I don't want to let everybody in yet. You see, that's what's weird is you're a panelist, so I don't know why it's not letting you in.
This is what I think I got this before. Let me click here. Speaker. What happens now? Okay. Yeah. Cool. Today I am not a registered employee. Host cannot register, same for the same.
That is so bizarre. I would log out and let me finish. I would go ahead and kill Zoom and then try again. It may be that it won't let you in until I start the webinar, which is bizarre.
Okay. Stop it. Okay. Close Zoom.
Close Zoom.
Okay. Clicking on the link you just sent me again. Taking time. Doing the same thing. Keep. Go. Not now.
Okay. Well, it may be that here, let me start the webinar and see if that does it.
No, this is going to be worse than.
Well, I'm just now starting it. So log out and try to log in again.
Okay. I will do my best. If I'm not here, it's not the right time. I will try once more. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye. Hello, folks. I see people are logging in. I was just talking to Keith, trying to get him logged in. He's having some technical difficulties, apparently. So we will get started here in just a second. There we go. Hopefully he can get in. It's giving him, Todd, we were talking yesterday about how it wouldn't let you in unless you registered. Well, for heaven's sakes, he had, first off, he was invited as a panelist. Secondly, hang on just a second. I'm going to put you all on mute. Oh, well, it looks like I may be flying solo today, which is unfortunate, but there you go. I just want to check something before we get started here. I just want to make sure we're recording. one of the things that I'm trying to do is to make sure that we have, yeah, okay, that we have the ability to record these because we're putting them on our website because not everybody can make this time. I certainly understand that. It's the middle of the day. You know, it's difficult to find a time that's going to work for everybody. Hang on a second. All right, sorry about that. Let's start again. So, welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. And again, we're recording this, so we're going to put it up on our website, should be there in a couple of days. And you can refer other people to it, or if you have to leave early, you can catch this at a later time. So, today's conversation is asking for accommodations, the law versus practicality. So last time we talked a little bit about, what sort of the overview of asking for accommodations looks like. You know, we talked a little bit about soft versus hard accommodation requests, but it was more sort of about the social aspect of it and what it looks like. Today, we're going to dig a little deeper into what the law says because there's a great deal of confusion. People don't always understand. Um, so let's see, just if I don't see any or my video, so I don't know if you can see or hear me. So Todd, I can see you. This is because this is a webinar. You'll have to raise your hand and then I can actually allow you to speak, or you can just ask questions here in Q&A or in chat. Either way works. Anyway, so today we're going to talk a little bit more about the law and why that's important is because first off, most employees don't understand the law. That's understandable. You're not attorneys, you're not well-versed in human resources, but the sad truth is a lot of companies don't understand the law, or they choose to ignore the law, hoping you don't figure it out. So that's part of the reason why this is such an important conversation. So we will get started here. Who are we? So we are EvoLibri Consulting. We provide multidisciplinary services to neurodivergent teens and adults, their families, and their employers throughout their lifetime. So a lot of clinicians or agencies work up until age 18 or over 18, but our experience is that transition, understanding what neurodivergent people need before they graduate high school, getting them through whatever post-secondary experience they might have, and then helping them ready for success in the employment world, and then helping them navigate that employment world is a continuum, and trying to chop that up typically is not a great idea. So that's why we work with the population that we do. So today, it's just me. Poor Keith cannot get logged in. I don't know why, which is really sad because he has a lot to say. Keith has worked for us for a minute now. I've known him for several years. He's comes from the talent acquisition side of the house and is neurodivergent himself. He's autistic, and so the perspective that he brings is very useful. And I'm sorry that he's not here today. So what we're going to talk about today is hard versus soft requests, what the ADA says. So this is the Americans with Disabilities Act that was ratified into law in 1974, I believe, and then it's been updated a couple of times. But that is sort of the foundation, both for workplace accommodations, but it's also the foundation for accommodations that high schoolers might request and college students. It's the foundational piece for all of that. We're also going to talk about what is it you should be asking for. There's a lot of confusion here, and I think that it's important for folks to understand how, what your burden is in terms of the person requesting the accommodations and how that can help the whole process go a little bit more smoothly. And we're going to talk about the process, what the law states the process should be. And of course, like most laws, it is open to interpretation. We're going to talk about that. And then recourses. What happens if you feel like your reasonable accommodation request has been denied? So we'll start off. Now, a formal request or a hard request, we might sometimes call it, typically requires documentation from a health professional with a list of requested accommodations. So this becomes part of your record, although it is supposed to be held confidentially by the company. Some people choose not to go this route because they're concerned about an organization or a company having information about them. Now, do know, and we're going to talk a little bit about this, you don't have to disclose what your disability is. You just need a letter from a medical or a health professional describing your challenges and what requested accommodations might look like. Now, we'll take the health professional. Now, here in the state of California, a health professional can be a mental health clinician. So it could be a licensed marriage and family therapist. It could be a licensed social worker. It can certainly be a psychologist, and it can be a medical doctor. Now, some companies will fight this and say it's got to be a medical doctor. Case law in California has not proven that out because, if you went to your general practitioner and said, I have severe ADHD and I need accommodations, they're here. I thought you were just here for your flu shot, right? It's not necessarily in their, what we would call scope of practice, right? So the scope of practice is what helps to determine whether or not it's the right health professional. So I've had to go chase a couple of organizations, a couple of California state universities who would not accept anything other than a medical doctor. We've also had to have some stern talks with employers about what a health professional with the scope of practice looks like. If you have a general practitioner and if they're willing to work with you, that might be the simplest way, but do know it's not your only option. Medical doctors are probably more used to writing accommodations, but for physical ailments. So for example, if you were in a car crash and let's say you have had a neck injury, your doctor is used to writing out a letter saying this person has had an injury and here are the accommodations they need for the next 3 to 6 or 9 weeks or whatever it is. But a mental health practitioner can also do that for you. So that is typically, if the company is going to push, that's the route that you'll need to take. Now, a soft or informal request, oftentimes, this is air quote good enough in a small company or a company where your manager well and you have a really familial relationship with them, that it's easy. And they may already know that you have a mild disability. So that is just an interchange, talking to the person about, hey, because of this thing, it's easier for me to work in this fashion. And sometimes that's all you'll need to do. In larger corporations, especially if there's a lot of turnover, if you're likely to get a new manager or if there's questions about people's ability to do the job, if you suspect there's going to be layoffs or any of that, it might make sense to ask for the harder formal request because ultimately you want to protect yourself that you have made a request for an accommodation. So you don't want, for example, a situation where you have a great working relationship with your manager and then one day he decides to up and leave the company. Now you have a new manager who knows nothing about you and sees that you have that you're not coming into work, let's say until 11 a.m. And because you get up and take your medication, and that's when you're most alert, is to be able to come in at 11 a.m., start your day there. This new manager is looking at that and saying everybody has to be in at 9 a.m. regardless. Well, you're kind of caught up because you had a working agreement with your previous manager. This manager doesn't know that. And now you're going to have to go through the process quickly of trying to make that a formal request. So there's always a little danger about the softer and formal request. There's plenty of issues with the formal request too, but if you make it formal, at least it lives, it has legacy, right? The other thing to remember is, which one you ask really depends on the situation, right? Some accommodation requests are super simple. And, it's more just a notification to your manager rather than a hard and fast, like changing your hours or using a different tool or something around those, which you might want to have a little bit more structure around just to kind of keep you safe. Any questions on this so far? Let me bring up chat. Sorry, it's really hard. And this is the one thing I don't like about this is that there's not enough real estate. And I probably need a second monitor. Anyhow, I have, just so you all know, I have the question and answer open. So if you want to ask me anything, please put it there and I will be able to see it and get you an answer. All right. So what's the law? So the EEOC says, number one, you have to be a qualified applicant. This is really critical. And this has come up a couple of times where I've seen people who say, yeah, I could do this job except for this bit. But that bit is fundamentally part of the larger job, right? So while it's not impossible, that would be closer to a job share. It's not impossible to get that kind of accommodation. They're difficult. And most companies, especially now, I think would kind of look at askance at that. So you have to be able to do most of the job or do the job as it's outlined with accommodations. You must be qualified. That is super important. You need to have a disability, a legitimate disability that interferes with you doing certain aspects of the job as it's defined. So when we think about this, typically, although not always, the accommodations is going to change the how, but not the what, if that makes sense. So what you're changing is how you're going to do it, not what the job is. So for example, a person that I heard speak once was I think he was a sales engineer. And suddenly, out of the blue, the sales engineers were being required to work a couple of 24-hour on-call shifts. This person had bipolar, and it was imperative that he get a full 8-hour sleep every night, or he would really struggle. And so he asked for the accommodation to be able to take an 8-hour shift over weekends, Saturdays and Sundays, during typical working hours rather than doing the 24-hour. So he could do the job, but he needed to do it in a slightly different way. And the company, Meta, wasn't thrilled with this, but over time they finally figured out a way to accommodate him. He just couldn't do that 24-hour because, as anybody who knows a sales engineer knows, they can work 22 hours a day if it's a critical issue. The other, and this is important too, the other piece is that the accommodation request cannot be an undue hardship to the company. Now, again, as I said earlier, all of this is a little bit woody, right? It's like, well, what does that mean? What's an undue hardship? It's a very good question, and the law is specifically or purposefully, I should say, a little bit loosey-goosey because obviously it'd be impossible to try to accommodate or to document every possible case study. So we're going to go into a little bit on what does undue hardship look like. So here are some case studies, and I think they hopefully will help to kind of elucidate what we're talking about here. So the first one, an employee, this is very common, by the way. An employee is asked for an accommodation to come into work later than the stated 9 a.m. start. They're a software engineer. Now, most software engineers, they come in, they may have a stand-up, they may have other meetings, but typically they came in, their job is to develop software, write software, bug fixes, all of that. So the time is not so essential. So what they're really asking is for how they do it to change, not what they're doing, right? However, think of another employee who's asked for an accommodation to come into work later than their 7 a.m. start, and they work in a convenience store. So that one could be an undue hardship. The reason being is the schedules are set that employees have this shift or that, 7 to 3 is a very common shift, and then 3 to whatever it is. And so it becomes an undue hardship, or it could be an undue hardship for that person to come in at 9 instead of 7, because who's going to cover for those 2 hours, right? It's not like there's a bunch of people running around who can do that work. These are shift jobs, and so it becomes more difficult, could be an undue hardship. Let's look at another one. So this was somebody I actually worked with, an employee who had a medical condition, who felt cold all the time. And they had asked to have a private office where they can regulate the temperature so they're not cold all the time. And finally, an employee who's asked for weekly written instructions on what her work assignments are for that week, and to get updated priorities throughout the week if the priorities change. So let's take a look at those and see what outcomes might look like. So for the first one, as I mentioned, for a salaried employee whose work isn't dependent on set hours, this is likely a reasonable accommodation. Now, as I mentioned, the pushback might be, yeah, but we have a stand-up at 9 a.m. and you can't miss it. You probably could argue that one. Is there any way to change that stand-up to, say, 10 and split the difference between 9 and 11? Don't know. For the hourly workers whose work is dependent on being physically present in the store, this may not be a reasonable accommodation. What we might suggest to them is to ask to change shifts. Can you take the afternoon shift? Is there somebody else who might be willing to do a bit of a split shift with you? So it's not impossible, but this one's a little bit dicier, as you can see, right? That it might be harder for a company to make that accommodation. They may have good cause to say it's undue hardship. Now, the next one about the person who has that heat regulation issue. At a small company, hard-walled offices are at a premium, and it's not likely that there's going to be an extra to park this person in. So we would look at other alternatives. Can we get them space heaters for their cubicle, which I'm sure facilities would hate because of fire danger? Or is this a person who we might say that it's okay for them to work at home, again, where they can regulate the heat? So it's not that it's undue hardship to accommodate this employee. It's just the how we might do it may need to change. And the last one, where it's a person asking for written instructions, and this is also a very common request. A lot of people who are particularly neurodivergent people sometimes have a hard time grabbing and processing information that's coming to them verbally. and they might forget it, they might get distracted. Sometimes there's an issue with auditory processing. So having things written down is really a good idea for them. But for some reason, I don't know why, it seems like a simple ask, but I have run into so many managers who really have a hard time with this one. They forget, they think it's additional work, blah, 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 and they just don't want to do it. So if this is something, that you've run into, or, this is the kind of accommodation that you see somebody asking for and the manager just can't do it, what I would recommend is try to meet the manager in the middle. So for this one, what I would recommend is for, if I were doing this, I'd create a Google sheet, right? That here's the typical tasks that I might work on. And I would share it with my manager, and I would, if I have a one-on-one with them every week, which I would hope for a person like this, I might, even if it's 15 minutes, is to fill that spreadsheet out with the manager real time. So you have that document, right? And then ask for 5-minute check-ins later in the week if anything changes. Or your manager could go in and change it on his or her own and notify you that they've made a change. Although I think Google notifies you. But regardless, instead of asking for the manager to start that process and to remember to do it every week on your behalf, make it easier for your manager. Have a protocol, have something that you do together so that you're not just pushing it all off onto the manager. Work on it together. Okay. So going back here for just a second, digging deeper, what does the process look like? And again, this is what the law says. Number one, as I said earlier, you must be able to do the job. I come across some folks who've asked me for help with accommodations, and in speaking with them, I come to find out that they really can't do the job. They might be able to do a related job or a lower level job, but the job that they have, if we go through the job description and they tell me a little bit about what their engagement looks like, they can't do it based on their actual skills, regardless of accommodations. So that's the most important thing. You have to be well qualified, and you have to be able to do the job with reasonable accommodations. Now, once you've sent an email, and oh, by the way, I highly recommend doing everything in email. Why? Because you have a paper trail. And it's really, really important to make sure that you have the documentation of the conversation, the back and forth, what you've requested, what their response was. Now, your employer legally must engage with you. And again, it is a little loosey-goosey, but once you've requested your accommodation, the employer must engage in an interactive process within a reasonable amount of time. Those are in quotes. Why? Because that's what the law says, but they don't necessarily tell you what that interactive process is or what a reasonable amount of time is, right? Courts have ruled on these things, and there's, some general guidelines, but nothing hard and fast. And again, as I mentioned, all correspondence should be in writing. That's just a standard CYA, as we call it. So what does the interactive process look like? So after you have submitted a request for accommodation, and you don't necessarily have to have your letter from your doctor at this point. In fact, I don't think I'd send it in until they request it, but I'd already have it in my hot little hands, if that makes sense. And when you send this letter or this email to your HR staff, I would copy and paste and say, based on my issues or challenges with blah, 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 I am requesting the following accommodations, blah, blah, blah. Send that off. Typically what will happen is human resources will respond fairly quickly, usually within 24 to 48 hours, and say, message received, we'll get back to you. Now, what happens next can be anything depending on the company. So companies who really have their act together will get back to you and say, great, we need a formal letter from your doctor. Can you please provide one? Really large companies don't even handle this themselves. They want to keep personal information separate from their company. So they may have a plan administrator. These are the same folks who handle leave of absence requests, all of that. So they may go through that plan administrator, or they may take that information themselves. And they should, within a somewhat reasonable time, either set up an appointment to speak with you directly, a Zoom call or an in-person, or they should respond to you in email with a detailed list of what they are willing to do and what they're not willing to do. Now, again, what's a reasonable time frame? Really, this should happen in no longer than 30 days. And it should be faster than that. But again, there's a reason for that. We're going to talk about why they may drag their heels. So as part of that interactive process, what does that look like? So your employer should do one of these following things. They should agree to your request. They should say, yeah, of course you can wear noise canceling headphones in the office. That's easy. Sounds like you already have them and you know what you need. So just tell your manager, but we'll put it in your file. Boom, you're done. They should offer another solution. One they might say would be, we understand that you want to wear noise canceling headphones, but we're hearing from your cube mates that you're actually blasting techno and it's distracting other people. So, here are a couple other solutions. Listen to your music more softly, or listen to something that doesn't carry as much, or maybe you could go work on the other side of the office where there are some empty cubicles. And that way you're not interfering with other people. Or they can tell you why it's an unreasonable request and why. So let's keep using this. So let's say you're working in a bullpen type environment where people are talking and handing data or information off to one another. And that's sort of the process, is communication in real time, spoken word. So if you have headphones on and you're listening to techno or whatever, you're not able to do your job as it's outlined, because now you can't hear what people are saying, right? So that's about the only thing I can think of that might be an unreasonable request, is it actually stops you from doing your job. So once you have that information from the company, you can either accept what they say, or you can appeal it. So this is that interactive process, right? So if somebody says, we're denying your request, and they should tell you why. Oftentimes they won't, but they should tell you why. You then can come back to them and say, okay, I understand that maybe my techno is kind of loud. And you're right, it does interfere with me hearing other people, but I really need to focus. So how about if I wear a pair of loops? If you don't know about loops, they're these little things that you wear. They're sort of like earbuds that put off different kinds of white, brown, or pink noise and kind of give your brain a little bit of a sound bath, but you can still hear. So that would be the type of situation where you're meeting them in the middle. Okay, I won't wear the headphones with the techno. Can I wear loops? Because that allows me to still hear people. So that's the type of interaction we want to see in an accommodations request. That's how it's supposed to work. Any questions so far? Everybody good? Awesome. All right. So a little bit more deep on this. Again, when requesting accommodations, be prepared with specific accommodations that would level the playing field. I highly recommend going to askjan.org and have a list prepared of what you're asking for. In fact, you should have that list before you even go to your doctor and request accommodations, because I've got news for you. Most doctors have no idea what accommodations look like for neurodivergent people, what's acceptable in the workplace, et cetera, and so forth. You understand your workplace, you understand your neurodivergency. What you may not know is, what does an accommodation look like, right? If we have time at the end, I'm going to take you on a brief tour of askjan.org so that you can figure out how to write up a list of reasonable accommodations. So then again, you're going to make a formal request to your HR department or representative. They should respond almost immediately, like I say, within 24 to 48 hours, telling you that they received it, and hopefully they give you an idea of how long it will take them. Once they've investigated the request, and that's what they call it, they should let you know what they will do or offer as an accommodation, or they will flat out deny the request. You have the right to go back to the table and ask again. Again, this really should be about negotiation. There are no hard and fast rules as to what reasonable is, nor are there hard and fast guidelines on how fast they need to respond. Check in politely if you haven't heard anything. I would say every 2 weeks. And eventually you may have to stomp your foot and say, look, this has been hanging for a while, right? So tips on the process. Some accommodations are simple to implement, right? And others are more complicated and costly. You can imagine, for example, somebody who was in an accident and suddenly is in a wheelchair, and the site of the office is not ADA compliant, which, oh, by the way, is not that uncommon. So that's a costly and time-consuming change, right? And so, not to say that the company wouldn't have the legal requirement to do it, but how they do it, how quickly they can do it, might be something of an issue. Be somewhat patient. Sadly, and this is simple truth, asking for accommodations can create a level of paranoia in the company. Why? Because it's legal, right? Because you are, whether you're trying to or not, invoking a federal law. And that not always, but that often gets people's hackles up, right? Like, oh my God, we got to do this right. And we have to protect the company, and we have to make sure that we don't make a misstep, or we'll get sued, right? They're always worried they're going to get sued. Not all companies behave this badly. Sadly, many do. And it doesn't have to be a company. It can be a university. It could be the state of California. I have seen pretty much every entity imaginable screw this up, right? Even those who are supposed to be actually helping disabled people have violated the law. So it is really kind of amazing in some regards. But it's also important to treat these requests as a negotiation process, right? Not as a list of demands. I've worked with several people who have come to me and they said, yeah, so I'm having trouble with my company. Here's the list of accommodations I've requested, and they're giving me a real hard time. And I look at the list of accommodations and I'm like, really? You asked them to do all of these things. And I understand, I want to be an advocate for neurodivergent folk, and I want neurodivergent people to stand up and to be able to ask for what they need and to be able to get it. But again, I'm a realist, and I know that, sometimes you attract more flies with honey than you do with vinegar. And these things, the concept of different abilities and the ability to have different kinds of people in the workforce is met with a lot of bias. And we don't want to layer more bias building on top of that. We want to be reasonable and yet get the things we need. So it's important to, kind of see the process, I suppose, from both sides. That's really, really key. So let's look at some more case studies. So an employee at a small company requested a sign language interpreter and was denied as it was an undue hardship to the company. Yet, an employee at Apple requested a sign language and interpreter and won a court case to get this accommodation as it was not an undue hardship for Apple. So think about this. This is a really good case study, I think. First off, the employee at the small company, that was actually us. I was trying to hire this really great person who was deaf. And we're tiny. Obviously, we don't have a whole bunch of money. And I looked high and low to try to find a way to get him an interpreter so that he could do the work for us, at least to get him started, to get him onboarded and trained. And the whole goal was that he was going to be working with the deaf and hard of hearing community, which has really significant needs. And there's a huge overlap with neurodivergency in the deaf community, by the way. Anyway, I looked everywhere. I tried everything. And the truth of the matter is that interpreters, understandably, make good money. They get paid anywhere from $75 to $120 an hour, right? And I was going to need an interpreter for many, many hours to help this person come up to speed. I simply could not afford it. It was going to be crazy expensive. I felt really badly. And I told the guy, it is an undue hardship. There is no two ways about it. I don't have the finances. However, a person working at Apple, think about their finances. It is not going to hurt them to provide that accommodation. And Apple said, well, it's undue hardship. And that was a long and protracted court case, apparently. And eventually the court found in the employee's favor, as well they should. Here's another case study. An employee at Citizens Bank with severe anxiety was refused reassignment to a less stressful job after they returned from a leave of absence and won a settlement. And the reason they won that settlement was because there were other suitable jobs that were actually being posted as open that person could have gone into. And yet they did not allow for a reassignment. Instead, they just let them go when they came back from their LOA. They got sued, understandably. The last is an employee at a small company asked for a new job to be created as an accommodation. This was a person who was struggling with interaction with the public, and they wanted to take a different kind of job that paid the same amount of money. And unfortunately, they were denied because it was an undue hardship to the company. The company was a service company. They made their money based on client meetings, much like we do. And the person wanted to get paid at that same pay rate, which is a handsome pay rate, but wanted to only do administrative work, for which is typically paid much less. So that was, again, an undue hardship to the company. Any questions so far? Cool. So remember, a couple of things. And, and the first one, it's really up to you, but you do not need to disclose your diagnosis. And anybody who asks you or questions it in the workplace is really pushing the legal law, the legal limit. So I've seen people say, here are my list of accommodations. By the way, I'm autistic and that's why I'm struggling. And then the manager saying really foolish things like, gosh, you don't look autistic. Which anybody who is autistic has probably heard that once or twice. But it's sort of like, first off, they can't say that legally. They're not a medical professional. They have no idea, number one. Number two, it's not theirs to judge. And that has nothing to do really with whether or not the accommodation should or should not be allowed, right? Now, some people, again, I wish we lived in a world where everybody could just, raise their hand and say, I'm ADHD, I'm autistic, I have diabetes, whatever it is. But our society doesn't always work that way. And so it may be a wise choice not to disclose, but it may also be an okay choice to tell people, certainly your manager, maybe your coworkers. For those of you who watch crap TV, as sometimes I do, guilty pleasure. This season of Survivor has an autistic player. Now, I haven't watched it steadfastly over all these years, but I really liked, and I don't know what's going to happen to her, but I really like her. But I love how she disclosed to a teammate. It was really a beautiful thing. And the way she handled it was so amazing that, in this fraught environment where it's, cloak and dagger and everybody's out to get one another, she made an ally who I truly do believe will go to the end with her and never, ever do her any harm. So sometimes it is, if you can find your allies, those are the people definitely you want to disclose to. Well, yeah. And then next, of course, research and request the accommodations that you think will help and make them reasonable, please. Um, because if you ask for too much too fast, you're just gonna, for better or for worse, come across as a bit of a whiny baby. They won't like it. So ask for what you truly need, and maybe over time you can do more. Such as training your coworkers or asking for an employee resource group or doing more, right? But right now, let's focus on just getting the job done. And then whenever possible, try to be flexible. That's really, really key. Again, I'm not saying you should stand down and just take no for an answer, not at all. But if somebody comes up with a reasonable solution, even though it's not your first choice, what you can do, is say, I will give it a try. I'm not sure it's going to work, but I will give it a try. Can we meet again in 2 months and rediscuss this to see if it's meeting my needs, right? Todd, I love this. Hang on, I'm going to get to you in just a second. And, whoops, oh, I went too far. I hate it when I do that. I get click happy. So, legal recourses. So let's say the whole thing's blown up. You think you're being reasonable. They think you're being unreasonable, and it's blowing up. Hire an attorney. If you believe that your rights have been denied, speak with an employment attorney. You can reach out to me. I love to put people on this or give references here. I do have some employment attorneys I've referred to in the past. You can also just Google it. There are people out there who this is what they do for a living, right? Is to help people kind of sort through it. I would say, regardless, if you're going to hire an attorney, be prepared to leave. So it is really rare, not impossible, but very rare to go through a process with an attorney and to, at the end of it, have a job that you still want to do. You've kind of poisoned the well, right? So if you've had that much of a contentious relationship with the company, the chances are good, it's going to have a chilling effect on your career at that company. It's people are going to be frightened or fearful of talking to you. It's going to make it kind of uncomfortable. I'm not saying it's impossible. There are people who have sued their employers and stayed. And oftentimes those are when there's been one or two really bad actors that are removed from the company, and then the employee can carry on. But it's not always the case. And the object lesson here is ask questions before you take your next job, right? So, for example, let's say you're the person who needs that sound canceling. When you're interviewing for the job, that's a cultural question. Hey, sometimes it's hard for me to focus when I'm doing my work. I'm wondering, would anybody have an issue if I wore those loops that help to screen the noise, right? So many times, and that would be a soft accommodation request, you can find out some of this ahead of time, right? By kind of doing your research and coming up with, you know, even practicing with a friend or somebody else about asking these questions as you're interviewing, so you kind of know what to expect going into the job. Oops, see, I did it again. Happy clicking. So that's it for today. I'm going to go through what Todd has beautifully written up here. And next month is managing workplace communications, which is often difficult for neurodivergent people. And moving on, we're just going to keep we're going to keep doing this because there's so much information out there that people don't get. And this is really kind of our way of doing that, is to help as many people as we can. And that's it. So I am going to close this down. Here we go. Stop share. But I am going to be looking at Todd's chat here. He's so wonderful. Yes. So, oh, you're wonderful. He went in and got this from sgn.org, the homepage. So, gosh, and I don't know if everybody can see it, but and I don't think I can share something within. Todd, can everybody see it? Do you know? Oops. Let me get out of here. Hang on. Because this is a good list, by the way. So the list of accommodations wrap around cognition, dress code, extended time, fine motor, fragrance, issues with supervisor, leave, limited scheduling, mentor, modified break schedule, modified schedule, and sensory. Yes, I think that is a good kind of basic list. So what I'm going to do is, hang on just a second. I have this open. Is it still open? Oh, where did it go? Rat. Oh, here it is. Okay. So I'm going to share this with folks. And open that up. Whoops, wrong one. Here we go. So here is askjan.org. And thank you, Todd, for bringing that up. So this is the Job Accommodation Network. And it's been around for, oh God, I want to say like at least 20 years and probably longer. And it is run by, drum roll, the federal government. And I'm hoping that it is so low down buried in the federal government that certain people who might want to do hack jobs on our services won't find us and kill it. I kind of don't think they will, because I happen to know the people who run the site, they're pretty incredible. So I think that they would be like the park rangers. They'd find a way to go hide this information so certain political bad actors wouldn't find it. Anyway, that's my hope anyway. So if you look at this, so they have for employers, individuals, A to Z, situations and solution finders, my jam publications, training, blah, blah, blah. So the A to Z is an interesting, oh, you can't see this anymore, can you? Oh, hang on. Just a second. Stop share. Let me share my entire screen. Yeah. Oh, okay. I was. All right. Boom. So this neat little box here has a table with pretty much every type of disability you could imagine. Now, for folks who are autistic, there are other things here that may apply. So what Todd was referring to was this bad boy here, which has a list of the different types of issues that folks might struggle with. And it's pretty dang comprehensive, I have to say. They've done a good job on this. So one thing to know is every one of these pages, and there's 50 or 60 pages, start with this: questions to consider. What limitation is the employee experiencing? And these are questions you should be asking of yourself, right? How do these limitations affect the employee and the employee's job performance? What specific tasks are problematic? What accommodations are available to reduce or eliminate those problems? That's why you're at this page, to help identify that. And once accommodations are in place, would it be useful to continue to meet with the employee to check on the effectiveness? And do supervisory personnel and employees need training? This one is really hard to get. I'm not saying it's not vital. It is. Talk to me. If you try to get this training in place or ask for this, feel free to reach out to me through our website and ask me, because I have some ideas on this. But here are accommodations ideas, right? And if we go through this, I'm going to guess that some of these are ones that have happened to folks on this call, right? These are also, many of these, as you can see, are executive functioning, right? Attentive and concentration, that is also ADHD. It's also other types of learning disabilities, organizing, planning, prioritizing, stress intolerance, respiratory distress, panicking, that kind of thing. So each one of these, then, they have a lovely little list. Okay, what can you do for this, right? And so you have a list here of all these different products you can try, services, counseling and therapy, strategies, right? Different strategies, everything from a support person, a support animal, flexible scheduling, that type of thing. So this is such a wonderful resource for folks. And I would really spend some time just kind of pawing through this. There's some really good information here. And as I say, although you know, if you're autistic, you're probably going to go to autism, but don't stop there. Many people, as I say, also have attention deficit hyperactivity type issues, whether or not they've been diagnosed. They also may have auditory processing disorder. They may have other sleep disorders. They may have related things. Spend some time going through all of this and taking a look at what is here that can help me, and create a list. And again, remember, you know, when you're doing this, you don't want to overwhelm your manager with 17 things that you're trying to get into place. Look for the ones that are going to have the highest impact for you to do your job. And you're better off asking for 2 to say 5 rather than 16, right? The other thing I wanted to let you know about, whoops, this isn't it. Let me see if I can find it. They've redone the website since I have dug into it recently. Where is, let's see, somewhere, here we go. So they have people who can help you. And if you look here, Jan consultants, highly qualified and experienced thought leaders, frequently asked questions, and Jan is here for you. So they've changed this a little bit, but they can help you if you're really stuck.
Here's why this little known.
Don't need that. Don't need that. But they have, they used to have a phone number where you can call them, and I'm sure they do still, an employer live chat, but you can also call them as an employee. So this is a service both for employers and for employees. And I would say, to the extent possible, use it. This is your tax dollars hard at work. Also this, yes. So that's what, no, we cannot. Now we can see it. Okay, good. I just want to make sure y'all can see it. So that is the presentation for today. Does anybody have any questions? Any either specific or general? We are here. Or I am here, since poor Keith somehow could not get on. Well, thank you for coming today. Again, feel free to share this. It'll be on our website, evolibri.com, under resources, under media, and they will show up. I believe they're coming up as YouTube videos. So feel free to share and share alike, as certain providers say. And thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it, and I hope to see you all next week. Have a good one.